Hello, folks. I'm Nick Bernardo, your host of MyGovWatch Live, the B2G Roundtable. If you're east of the Rocky Mountains here in the U.S., good afternoon. Good morning to those out west, and hello to anyone joining us from the far corners of the earth or watching online in the future. Today's Wednesday, January 22nd, 2025. This series is brought to you by MyGovWatch. With a curated white glove approach, MyGovWatch delivers leads in more than 200 industries at double the rate of free government tools and at a fraction of the cost of legacy websites. Big government contracts do not start with a solicitation, but all roads lead to one, and your budget for hearing about RFPs does not have to be thousands of dollars per day, per year even. Start your free 14-day trial today. Good afternoon, folks. We have a couple of co-hosts with us. We have Nicole Pottroff and Stephanie Ellis with the Koprince law firm out of Kansas. And how are you ladies doing today?
Great,
Doing
Nick.
well.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for being on. Nicole has been with us many times. Stephanie, I believe this is your first time, is it not?
This is, yeah.
Yes. Okay. Well, welcome. I'll just do a
Thank you.
quick intro. So Nicole Pottroff is an equity partner at the Koprince law firm, where she practices federal government contract law exclusively. Nicole works with clients on a wide variety of transactional matters, from organizational contracts to teaming arrangements, and advises clients on compliance with small business and procurement regulations and statutes. Nicole assists clients with litigation matters, including bid protests at the GAO and size and status protests at the SBA. She's also a regular contributor to the government contracting blog at smallgovcon.com. Nicole enjoys helping businesses solve problems, and she's very good at it. Stephanie Ellis is an associate attorney at the firm. Prior to joining, Stephanie worked as a staff attorney for the Office of the Kansas Securities Commissioner at the Kansas Insurance Department. At the Office of the Kansas Securities Commissioner, Stephanie assisted with enforcing the Kansas Securities Act through civil, criminal, and administrative actions by collaborating with attorneys and investigators nationwide on large-scale matters and reviewing new and existing offerings for compliance with the Act. So welcome again, ladies. We had more than 50 people sign up. We should have 20 to 30 people on with us. I know there's a bunch of people who have questions, but folks, I've been trying to make this like as casual as possible, right? It's not a stuffy webinar where we're just giving you a monologue. So I'm just wondering, like, what are people looking forward to this year? So I have, and I always point in the wrong direction. I have a picture of me and my then 13-year-old son, and that's at the top of the hill in Montreal, Canada. So we went there over the New Year's in 2022 into 23. And one thing I'm looking forward to this year is I promised him that we would take a trip, just the two of us. And I promised this to all of my kids, so their time will come. We're going to go to Europe in August for a little while, and we're going to do some cool father-son stuff, and I cannot wait. That's what I'm looking forward to. So, Nicole, what are you looking forward to this year?
That's awesome. I am planning on taking my two toddlers to Arkansas, which we do pretty much every year, but every year is a little more exciting because they're 2 and 4 and they're just a little more capable of having a fun vacation. Every year, a little less inclined to, lose it completely over something mid-vacation. So excited about that.
Well, things are going to change a lot, and they're going to continue to change. And I'm sure there will come a time when you're hopping on a train in Europe with one or both of them.
Fingers crossed. Yes, please. Yeah.
How about you, Stephanie?
Well, initially I took this as what I was looking forward to in the GovCon world, so I misinterpreted
It could be either or
that.
both.
Well, I'll get a little more personal. And I want to say, Nick, I actually did what you did with my daughter last year, she was 12 at the time. We didn't go to Europe, but we did just a girls' trip, and having that one-on-one time was amazing. It was such a good bonding experience. But this year I'm really looking forward to, we have a few different trips planned. We're really into musicals and Broadway things, so we're traveling for a couple shows, and also going on a cruise this year. So really just traveling and experiencing new and different things.
Well, it should be a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to all of this. And a year from now, we'll jump on again, and I'll ask you, how did it go? And we'll hear some good stories. So I'm going to start with just a question for you ladies, and then we're going to jump to Harold, who's in the clothing business, who has some questions about product sources of origin. So Harold, we're going to bring you on momentarily. But one thing that a lot of people are talking about, and we're actually doing a press release about this next Wednesday, that points to MyGovWatch Live from November 20th, because a lot of people are just assuming that government contracting will contract or shrink under a second Trump administration. And so just as just a general starting question, what are some of the federal government contracting issues that people should pay attention to or expect to change, even if we can't predict now how that change will take shape? What are some things that you think are coming down the pike?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And it is incredibly hard to predict. And something that we were talking about recently with one of our clients, because we've had a lot of clients reach out and ask very similar questions, ask actually kind of what do we anticipate for the woman-owned small business program, Mayday program, all of those things. And it is really, it's hard to tell for a couple reasons. One, everybody's familiar with politics and how campaigning can sometimes be not quite as predictive of what's actually going to go on for a million different reasons. One being just kind of that whole time between action and effect that we tend to see in the federal government, where even if an action is taken, we sometimes don't necessarily see the effects of that action for quite some time. But overall, I think that no matter what, keeping an eye out for these small business programs that are based on, at least somewhat based on, the kind of affirmative action standard, I think we are likely to see some changes there. I am not sure how quickly or how dramatic those changes will be, but we have already seen some changes, and kind of exactly on par with what I just said, some of the changes we saw to the 8A program recently actually did kind of, in a way, trickle down from the initial Trump administration and the assignment of certain individuals to the Supreme Court and things like that. So keeping an eye out for changes to that, I think, is important, and being aware, especially because a lot of people invest a lot of time and money and resources into applying and being a part of those programs. So making sure that you're up to date on what's going on and what's in the close future, at least for those, I think is really important if you're even looking into those programs at all. But I think overall, the government is a massive customer. We expect to see a lot of requirements out there, a lot of money out there being poured into contracting. So I think a lot of it's going to stay the same, and I think a lot of it we are going to see some changes, and it's just a matter of when we see those changes.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And if I point back to MyGovWatch Live from November, and you can find that on YouTube. If you find our channel, you'll see the November 20th session. We presented some charts, and this will be in the press release next Wednesday, that shows that despite what statements may have been made in 2016 and early 2017, overall government spending went up, overall contracted spending went up, and overall small business spending went up over the 4-year period. There was what people said and then what they did. Now, I'm just wondering, and Stephanie, feel free to comment on the earlier question or on this one or both, but will we see a slight contraction in overall spending, or maybe a slower rate of growth? And maybe we'll see a higher percentage of outsourced spending, especially IT or artificial intelligence spending. I know there's some people who are involved in artificial intelligence on the session with us today.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. Some of the executive orders that we've already seen come out. I know one that has really stood out to me. It has to do with remote working and remote workers. I'm very interested in seeing how that kind of all plays out, especially in like AI and IT sort of industries. A lot of the contractors do work from different parts of the country, and it'll be interesting to see how much of them are actually made to go back into the office, and then what kind of effect that'll have on the overall industry there as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I noticed that one too. And your comment makes me wonder, and I haven't read that executive order. Maybe or maybe it's to be seen, but is that intended for direct employees, or is that intended for contract workers, or both?
There has been so much going on that I haven't gotten real deeply into it yet to know the answer to that just off the top of my head. It's just one of those things that, well, I'll get around to figuring out the nuts and bolts of.
Yeah.
Something
It's hard
tells
to
me
keep
we're gonna
up right
find out
now.
one way or the other.
Yes.
We sure will. Yeah.
All right, well, I'm going to bring Harold on. So Harold, let me bring you in. And Harold, you should be getting a prompt to join as a presenter. And we're going to come back to some of these issues, Nicole and Stephanie, and I might have some follow-on questions, things you might expect in the new administration. Hey, Harold, we just need your audio.
Yep. There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Welcome to MyGovWatch Live, Harold. I always start with this question. What do you do and where do you do it from? Can it possibly be with a fireplace and the beach?
I aspire to the fireplace and the beach. We're working out of LA, Southern California. Been spared the fire, so we don't have to worry about that. Just have to kick the tires. And we specialize in the area of clothing and other, textile subject matter. We have clients, we have resources, domestic and international. And my question is between, and I got a couple of questions, but this one is between domestic and foreign sources. Tell us a little bit about the challenges that we face on the foreign sources. I understand the domestic sources are much easier to work with when looking at a government contract.
Yeah, so Nicole and Stephanie, I'd like to ask you guys to start off with this, but like, here would be my way of phrasing the question. If you're selling stuff, where should it come from and why?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really great question, Harold. And Nick, I loved your phrasing as well. But as it stands now, we already have quite a few checks in place to really try to promote spending from American sources as much as possible, American products. We've got the Buy American Act, we've got the TAA, we've got the Berry Amendment, all these different things that have been put into place, not to mention even like the non-manufacturing rule for small businesses has an American small business component to it. So, there's a lot of things in place. I would not be surprised to see an increase either in kind of new checks and new limitations or really kind of in the application of those. We do see a lot of inconsistencies in the way those are applied. We've personally filed protests in the past where a solicitation needed to include, under the regulations, under statute, needed to include certain, I think it would have been the Buy American for that one, and didn't because the agency just didn't put it in. But of course, the protesters wanting it in there because they had gone through all the trouble of making sure they were complying with it, and they did not want to be competing with people that didn't have to. So we've even seen inconsistencies in agencies applying those to solicitations. So I could see basically a stronger enforcement of what's already in place. I could also see an increase in the types of different regulatory and even statutory limitations that we're seeing on the sourcing. Now, all of those and any of these things, including the non-manufacturer rule, do have kind of exceptions, waivers, the ability for, certain things just are not made by American businesses or even small businesses in America. And so there are already some exceptions. What I would be curious to see is how we handle those exceptions. And I don't have an answer. If I had to just, gun to my head guess, I would say we see less of the exceptions and we see a tighter application of those exceptions, and we see more enforcement of just general Buy American products. But I also think, kind of tying this back to my very initial statement about what should we expect, the government is still a business, and there are certain things that we cannot and don't produce here. If you're curious what a lot of those are, there are lists, and I'm happy to put that in the chat or whatever, but there are lists of certain things that we've just accepted thus far are typically not American company made. And a lot of those are things like spices or, things that we don't have here. We just really don't. They don't grow here. We don't make them here. So there will always be exceptions, in my opinion. And so I would be interested to see how those exceptions get applied in the future. And probably going to see, I think, at a minimum, a more consistent and tight application of those rules in solicitations where agencies face a bit more problems if they do not put them in when they're supposed to.
Harold, do you mind if I ask a follow-up question on your behalf?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
I don't have a lot of experience with federal product purchases and where things are coming from, and maybe you can't reduce this to a number, ladies, maybe you can, but if there were 100 federal solicitations for items, right? how many of those are they saying this must come from a US source? And how many of them are they sort of expecting proposals where they're saying the source is another country? Is it something where you could say the majority are Buy American or it's 50-50?
I think vast majority are Buy American. And really because of the way that it is already structured to kind of be a Buy American unless instead of a, hey, this could be Buy Foreign. There's the kind of the standard is Buy American, and then unless there's a waiver or an exception. Yeah, I think that that's vast majority, to be honest. We get occasionally we get the protests or the clients coming to us talking about foreign made products, and it's almost always in a this should not be allowed fashion, to be totally honest, at least with what we're seeing. Um, Now, I do know that there are certain things that just don't work that way. You can't get them here. I just think that number is pretty small compared to the massive amounts of things that over the years, there's been, if it's something that can be done in America, it seems like businesses have done a really good job. And, shameless plug of what Nick does, but using resources like Nick's like MyGovWatch and everything like that to find what the market needs, what they need and what is lacking. What do American companies not produce that they could be producing? And so I think we've actually had a lot of companies really start to fill those voids over the years. And you have things like sole sourcing capabilities where if you can bring your company to produce something or create or a service or whatever it may be that typically is not something that is done in America, then you could be getting sole source awards if nobody else does it. You don't even have to compete for those things. So there's really a lot of motivation for American companies to kind of fill those voids. But even in the small business regulations where you're talking about what is a small business in America can be a foreign owned company provided that it still needs to be small and it has an American presence. So it needs to have either an American location, that's typically part of it. They want to see some kind of foot on the ground in America, but also, and that it contributes to the American economy. So pays American taxes, things like that. So really, even a foreign owned business can qualify kind of for these American small business products and services that are being required as long as it does so in accordance with the rules. So I think as far as just completely foreign owned businesses, foreign products, no American tie, producing things that our government is buying, I think that number is really small, but I don't have a statistic. So, I could be
Yeah.
way off. That's just kind of my impression of it. Yeah.
Now, we're not confined simply to the garment industry. We would likely expand into other product lines, and it could be domestic. The question is, as we start into this and start reviewing our opportunities, we're looking at possibly looking at the small opportunities to get our feet wet, to be able to overcome any challenges that would normally be faced in this approach, so that we can become proficient before we go on to the big scale, into the bigger contracts that we can satisfy. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. And let me just take that a step further. That is a method of getting market share in government contracting that we recommend all the time. So whatever you perceive to be a small opportunity, I would jump all over that because although it may not move the needle for you as a company, there's nothing like having a local reference or a county reference to bid on a state contract or having a state reference to bid on a federal contract because the value that different government buyers place on you having a government reference is disproportionate to how you value that client in raw terms. So yes, you should bid on things that you think nobody else cares about.
Well, we have experience in conducting this kind of activity, not with government contracts, but with the private sector. Um, how would they perceive us coming into this for the first time? Seeing a contract and bidding on it, doing a proposal, the whole thing.
So I guess maybe I'll ask maybe Nicole or Stephanie to talk about the concept of past performance at the federal level, and maybe I'll add something else at the state and local level.
Okay.
Yeah, I can take that. So they're going to be looking, like you said, for past performance. The past performance does not have to just be with the federal government. Having something from like a city or state, any kind of local municipality, anything of that nature is going to look good and count towards having a good past performance. It also, you know, they'll sometimes look for having done a certain value of a contract size, things of that nature that are going to uh you know, count towards the past performance, having a good reviews on that, things like that.
Could
Yeah.
you give me that's good. I'm glad you shared that. I was curious, can you give me an example of a client that you worked with that was in a similar venue where they're trying to provide a product to you know, either federal, state, or local government, one that was a real success. Tell me about your experience with that and the challenges that you faced with that.
And Harold, are you directing, who are you directing the question at?
It's an open-ended question. It's for anybody, whoever likes to take it on.
Yeah, I would say this, and then maybe Nicole can speak for the firm. We have lots of people who use our site to sell products, including to the federal government. And we judge whether or not they're being successful by whether or not they keep using the site, because we don't have a contract to use our site. It's just pay as you go. So I'm sure there are some examples I could point to, although just because of the number of users we have, I just don't have them memorized. Where there are product producers who are successfully selling to government agencies using our tool. So that's how I would answer it from our standpoint.
Okay. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. And you know, obviously with what we do, we have to be a little careful when we do refer to clients and things like that. But I can tell you that I've got clients that started a good measurement of success. I think there's a lot of ways you can measure success, but when it comes to things like this, but a good measurement for success. And if this client were listening, I know they would know I was talking about them, but I won't specifically name them or anything. But I have a client I started working with when I very first started into this industry of law, this area of law, and they were selling one thing to the federal government, and they now have, I think, 5 different divisions of their small business that are selling 5 dramatically different things to the government because they had such great success initially and were able to really, you know, learn just the ins and outs, whether the product was this or that. They learned there's certain things that just follow that are the same for all of them that can be applied across the board. Another thing, this kind of goes to your last question, but I think it's important, is when you're looking into kind of that initial dive into the bigger pool of everything, keep in mind teaming. Teaming is such a valuable part of federal government contracting. And, you know, the government understands you have to start somewhere. And I often kind of compare it to, it's kind of fun, but in a lot of law firms don't want to hire a brand new attorney. However, you have to start somewhere. I prefer to hire brand new attorneys personally because I like to take somebody that has not learned anything incorrectly, but rather, yeah, start fresh with the correct ways of doing things. So I kind of keep that in mind because I know that kind of feels like a big catch-22 to a lot of people that are just starting out. So same thing here, you have to start somewhere, yet you're going to see these solicitations that say, we need, and Stephanie nailed it, we need recent and relevant experience, and relevance going to include magnitude of at least 10 million. And you're going, I haven't done a $10 million contract. So that's where teaming can be just massively helpful. A good thing to keep in mind, that mentor protege program, I don't think that's going anywhere. We see a lot of, and we are seeing a lot of kind of criticism of the program and how it needs to be a bit more, I think, strictly administered, and some agencies, including SBA itself, have raised some concerns with the just sheer amount of mentor protege joint ventures out there and how much work they're getting. So we will see some changes, I believe, but I don't think that program itself is going anywhere, and it's made for exactly things like this. You come into the federal government contracting world as clearly would be a protege here and look for a mentor, and maybe that's a large business that wants small business set aside work, and you say, I'm small, I can help you get small business set aside work if you can kind of really help me start to understand this. Well, the past performance rules are all moving in the direction, and have been for some time, of maximizing the efforts of your past performance of your teaming members. So being able to say, as a protege, I might have a little bit of experience in, you know, municipal and state and local stuff, but my mentor has done massive government contracts, sold, millions of garments. Here's their past performance as well. So keep in mind, those are all really good options when you're first getting started to not have this, immediate kind of disadvantage compared to all the other companies. And do give them a chance to say, hey, America, you want to start growing these very small new businesses and startup companies. Here's how you do it.
Yeah, I just want to jump in there because there's someone who's asking a clarifying question. And so sometimes when we talk about federal contracting on these sessions, it becomes a little pedantic because there's so many terms of art that the federal government uses. So teaming in federal parlance is a term of art that refers to multiple companies either forming a joint venture or forming a prime sub relationship to meet a federal contracting requirement. And that is specifically what it means. And so, just to answer that question. So sometimes with federal contracts, I feel like the terminology just makes it hard to talk about, especially if you're new to it. So I encourage people, if you have questions about some of what we're saying, raise your hand and we'll talk about that as sort of a little, side route in today's session. But hopefully that answers the question about teaming. And Harold, one thing I didn't get a chance to, or I didn't ask you, is what are you looking forward to this year?
We are looking forward to start small, and that is just find the opportunity that we'll be able to meet. We've never done this before. We've never jumped into government contracts. It's one thing to deal with a client that we get through referral or that we identify as an opportunity outside of the government contract industry. But now that we're looking into this, we're looking for an opportunity to grow within this scope because it seems to me to be a very untapped opportunity. There's a lot of money sitting on the table that nobody's collecting, so I've heard. And I'd like to be able to get a piece of that pie.
Well, and it's not just at the federal level. I'm sure there's some purchases happening at the state and local level. I just think you're probably right in focusing on the federal level because I think the order of magnitude is just going to be larger. However, that does create more eyeballs on those opportunities. So to the earlier question, if you
Yeah.
see things on our site or things like it at the state and local level, that's certainly a great place to start because
Definitely.
federal opportunities will look at your past performance on state and local opportunities and consider that as relevant experience.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and Harold, you can stay with us as a panelist because this really is intended to be a conversation. Like we don't have to put you back into the audience. You can just sort of hang out. There's a number of people I spoke with prior to this event. Now would be a good time to raise your hand. And as you think about maybe what your question might be, please raise your hand so I can see that, and we will bring you on. We'll talk to you a little bit about your business and what your questions may be. But let me just think of sort of a follow-up question for Nicole and Stephanie. You mentioned earlier about how some things that might be happening in federal contracting might relate back to things that happened or that were attempted and put into place between 2017 and 2021. I think this is a guess, but I've known you, Nicole, and I've heard you talk about different things. One of those things, I'm assuming one of those things would be around the presumption of being disadvantaged as it relates to 8A and the disadvantage programs. How do you think, like, as that continues to progress, like, what's an update on that? And how do you think that may change, if at all, in the next 4 years?
Yeah, Stephanie does a ton of work with 8A. Stephanie, do you want to take a kind of initial stab at this one and then I'll jump in?
Sure, yeah. I definitely think that it's going to be an interesting 4 years in that regard. With the Ultima decisions and that line of cases. If anyone that's on here doesn't know what that was for the 8A program, certain nationalities and ethnicities were presumed socially disadvantaged. What that means is that there's been persistent bias that has affected essentially their entry and advancement in business. And that, along with economic disadvantage, are the two criteria for two of the criteria for the 8A program. And when Ultima happened, essentially it had the effect of taking away any kind of presumed social disadvantage. So now everyone has to do what they call a social disadvantage narrative, and you have to be able to prove that actions that happened that were discriminatory or biased based on a distinguishing characteristic had a negative effect on your entry or advancement into business. I think with some of the talk that we've seen about doing away, especially with like diversity, DEI sort of measures, is a bit of a foreshadow possibly into what might happen in the coming years. I'm very interested to see where that goes with that. And really, I mean, what they're having applicants do at this point, for the most part, does away with kind of those DEI, at least the presumption of being any kind of disadvantage. So that'll be an interesting area to keep an eye on for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, and I agree. I think that so what they are kind of currently doing, there's been quite I mean, we did a presentation on it recently, and of course, I still think I'm obviously adorable when I come up with fun little things like this, but I was calling it the social disadvantage narrative saga. And it's been a saga. When I first started doing this type of law, I was kind of deemed the social disadvantage narrative attorney at the firm, mostly because it's such a unique area of writing. It's a very kind of emotional, biographical type of, really making sure that you're able to pull from everything from physical impacts to actual financial impacts to mental impacts to things that most attorneys did not sign up to write about. And so it takes a very special kind of attorney that is able to write those things. Stephanie has always been fantastic at those as well. And even when she started doing them, same thing. They were long documents where we were putting in lots and lots of information, lots of analysis. And so they have evolved to, at the point they are right now, it's the new My SBA certifications. Is that what it's called? My SBA certifications, I think, is the new portal. I think it is. It was certify.gov. It's no longer, unless you're using it.
I think it's certifications.gov
Yeah.
now.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Crazy. Or yeah. Yeah, it's changed a lot. So if you get on that now, that is where you would apply as a new applicant. And that is where you would put in your social disadvantage. Well, now there's character limits and everything. So you're really just answering a couple questions about social disadvantage. But I think Stephanie makes a great point, is what that has now done. It really has taken away the DEI aspect of everything. It really has, because we're no longer trying to systematically include certain groups or systematically benefit certain people over others. We're looking for, how has society disadvantaged you individually? And it could be anything from I have a disability to I have a mental disability to being, of a gender that's less, not as commonly getting this type of work and things like that. So I would say one really important thing keep in mind there. I've always wondered why social disadvantage did not include more of a just disadvantage generally. I understand that was the purpose of the 8A program, that social disadvantage, the social aspect to it is what made it a kind of affirmative action-based program. And so I'm wondering if we may start to see changes wherein you can show any kind of disadvantage, as in, I don't have to show that, me having a mental disability resulted in bias and discrimination, as much as I can just show that it has held me back in some way and I deserve some kind of leg up because of it. So I would be interested to see if maybe that starts to take, if anybody raises that point, it might just be me over here in Kansas, but that would be something I'd be interested to see. Could be a positive change, a more inclusive change of everybody that has faced hurdles in the program or in the industry. So yeah, that's all I've got on that one.
Well, Stephanie and Nicole, and Nick, you've all shared your crystal ball somewhat about some of the things that are changing now. What is your crystal ball telling you when it comes to product-based opportunities? Have you seen a major increase in opportunities in the areas that I talked about? And generally speaking, what specific areas?
I could not speak to offhand.
Hmm.
a precise number of opportunities, because
No,
one
no
thing we
percent.
haven't talked about is specifically what you're selling, right? It could be any number of things, and the answer for one type of thing may be different for another. But I would say this. So Nicole just gave a very good overview of the social disadvantage aspect of some of the dollars that are set aside for minority-owned firms and women-owned firms. There are two other statuses that have nothing to do with an inherent characteristic. They are the disabled veteran-owned program, right, which has to do with if you served in the military and do you have a disability rating. And then secondly, the hub zone program. And even those, and correct me if I'm wrong, ladies, is it still 3% or did they bump that up?
I think for disabled veteran, I think that's 5% is
Okay,
what
so
it was last year. I know
yeah,
that it
so
had been raised, and I think it was to 5%.
they
How-
bumped it up. But I just wanted to say this to you, Harold. Although there are dollars set aside for different groups, there are large dollars that are not set aside for any group. And there are large dollars that are set aside for small businesses, regardless of any other factor. So no one should get the impression that most federal dollars are set aside for one of the four groups: disadvantaged, women-owned, disabled vet, or hub zone. They actually have trouble meeting those small percentages, 5%, with a lot of these programs. So if you want to engage one-on-one on some reports on how often the federal government buys a certain widget, we can certainly do that offline.
Okay.
I want to raise one other point with that, is that also within, unrestricted competitions, in most cases, there is a small business subcontracting requirement that has to be met within the contract as well. So even if something is, full and open competition, if you are able to, get some connections with someone who's working in the same industry, there's a good chance that contracts that they're getting have a small business subcontracting requirement that needs to be met.
And to bring it full circle with that, because that's a great point, that's another great way to get your feet wet in the federal government industry, is to start on some really big requirements as a subcontractor or and we say subcontractor, that encompasses everything from 1099 to a supplier, a producer. So being able to supply certain products, even those large businesses, like Stephanie said, are often looking for an American company to buy stuff from, or they're looking for a small business to meet those small business requirements. And coming into your first big federal government contract solicitation with a good subcontract under your belt can be really helpful.
Okay.
Sorry, I was on mute. Please stay with us if you'd like. If you have a follow-up question, you can ask it. If you want to go back into the audience and then come back later, we can do that. We're going to bring Dave on.
Hi, Dave.
Hey there.
Welcome to MyGovWatch Live. What do you do and where do you do it from? Because I'm quite certain the microphones are good, but they're not so good to give us such a good audio signal from the top of that hill overlooking the
I
bridge.
apologize if I was blinding everyone with my first entry into the call. I had a huge glare behind me. So here we are on this bridge. So my name's Dave Krautheim. I'm a regional president for a company called Tier 4 Advisors. I operate out of Philadelphia. Our focus is we are an IT advisory firm focusing on procurement of IT services for our clients. I worked with a couple local universities and was told, hey, you've got to first order of business, you got to get registered with the state as a CoStar's vendor and all this good stuff. So I went through that and I just kind of started glancing around and saw some pretty good opportunities out there. And then so have been pursuing some since then. I kind of have a general question, maybe even rudimentary. Is there a way to identify an RFP, which is really an open RFP for all participants? Something, and this may be a little different in the federal level, but a lot of times at the state level, the RFP is just a formality. It's kind of been decided where that bid is going to go, and maybe this is not spoken in these worlds, but do you all find that, and is there a way to circumvent or identify those RFPs which are going to give you the most value in terms of attainability?
I would love to take that first, if you ladies don't mind, and then
Sure.
you might have some observations related to protests and things that you've actually seen where it seems wired for a vendor. We did we did a survey last year, and we're planning on doing it again. And I'd love to get you ladies involved in it with the firm, where we sent out thousands of emails to government procurement people who are actually involved in awarding these bids. And whenever I stop talking and one of the other ladies takes over, I'm going to find the link for it and put it in the chat. But one of the questions we ask them is like, how often do you know who you're going to pick before you make a selection? And you might be surprised that it's not as often as you think. Now, do they do it? Absolutely, they do it. But the good ones, and this is certainly not a legal answer. This is just like, a guy from Philly also, by the way, who kind of can read the tea leaves with things. They do a good job of it when they make the requirements narrow enough that they get a handful of bids, but not so broad that anyone can bid. So if you see a requirement and it feels narrow, but it feels like there might be just a handful of companies that could bid on it, that might be a tell that they have a pretty good idea of who they want. If you see a broad requirement, then they have no idea. And if you see a requirement where there's only one company that can do it, and it's not listed as a sole source because they're the only ones that can do it on the planet, then you should probably protest that requirement. So let me just stop there. I'm going to go find the link while Nicole and Stephanie chime in.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. That's and that really is a good question for Nick, your question. Now we can give a little input on protests and things like that, but really a lot of what the MyGovWatch program does is help you identify those things. And then Nick does have a lot of very unique insight, things like statistics that he goes and runs incredibly brilliant algorithms and even simply sending a bunch of emails and seeing what responses you get, things that we don't really necessarily do. I love to see the results of things like that Nick has to share. In our line of work, what we usually run into, so vast majority of our clients are small businesses. So we're going to have a biased take on this. Obviously, I think we represent maybe 2 or 3 companies that are now large generally. And usually those are even still small for a couple NAICS codes. So what you then would be looking at, and just important thing to note, not sure if everyone is already aware of this or not, but whether you are small or not for a certain contract is going to depend on that NAICS code. So you could think you're a large business because you're bigger than some of these NAICS codes. Well, you want to make sure you look at the specific contract or the specific industry of the contracts you're looking at and see what the NAICS code is and what its size standard is. And you may be considered small for something. I mean, the construction NAICS codes are large in the 40 million a year range. So like there's certain things where you would be surprised to find you are still a small business. But all of that said, what we typically run into, people come to us when something is set aside, kind of in the latter of the situations that Nick kind of explained there, where something is not set aside at all, and it seems to be a very broad, just so many things that maybe only one company could do it. Well, that would be a time when someone would come to us and protest and say, look, this could easily be multiple requirements that small businesses can do, and they would basically call it kind of an improper consolidation. So the government consolidated a bunch of different work into one thing that now only a large business could do. So there's a lot of policies out there that support not doing things that way. But then there are certain things, like Nick said, where it could just be something that it's not extremely broad. It's a narrow requirement, but it's something that a lot of US small businesses just can't do, or no US small business can do. So in which case they would look to large businesses, and typically they would even do that before they would open it up wider, hoping to still get that Buy American component to it. So we see a lot of the protests kind of looking at those things negatively, but we understand there's a lot of companies out there that need that kind of non-set aside work. So yeah, I think that's it. I think Nick's description of kind of what to look at is a really good way to judge whether you're looking at something likely to get protested or not.
And Dave, it's really something that you have to look at on a case-by-case basis.
Sure.
For everyone, I did put in the chat the link to something we put out last year, which has actual data on how likely are they to be looking at an incumbent, for example, or how likely are they to hire someone that they even heard of. And some of the numbers in that report may surprise you. So I just want to make a note here. So John, you're next. Ricardo, we see your hand. You're after John. But Dave, what other questions do you have for now? And you can certainly stay on the panel and jump back in.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's about it. One thing I was thinking, and again, this might be a use your best judgment kind of scenario, and I come across this scenario a lot in my business. But when do you pull the abort string on an RFP process? How deep do you let yourself get into it until you say, what, based on just these initial requirements, or do you go all the way to that first vetting process to see if you pass, or what's your sense there?
Sorry, I just wanted to come off mute. I would say this, as a general rule of thumb, if you become aware of something that is coming in the future as an RFP, it's certainly never a bad idea to get ahead of it. And by that, I mean, you can certainly pick up the phone before an RFP is released if you're aware that there's a need that a government agency has, and coach them on things that they might want to think about in formulating the requirement. And you want to try to get ahead of the RFP as a best practice. But if you see an opportunity and you think it's right up your alley, and you don't see anything in the RFP that points to one particular vendor, then I would encourage you, if you have the ability to respond to the RFP, to give it a whirl, because you can't win if you don't submit an offer. So I know that creates a lot of work, but I think it's the kind of thing that you get a sense of if you respond to enough RFPs over time.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah, I think also looking at the resources of your own company and how many resources you want to put into pursuing that one specific solicitation as well.
Sure.
A lot of times when people come to us, it's when they have already there's already an issue. They've either they've been told that they haven't passed the first round of evaluations, or whatever it is. And at that point, then usually people are looking at protests. That again is another how many of your resources do you want to put into that?
Sure. Thank you.
So Dave, stay with us. You can certainly jump in if you have follow-up questions. At this point, I'm going to ask John to unmute and join us.
Hi, John.
Hey, everyone.
Hey, John, welcome to MyGovWatch Live. What do you do and where do you do it from?
So I'm here on behalf of an IT infrastructure service company, and we're based out of Sarasota, Florida. We basically provide services for anything data center related. So backup and storage, network, telephony, voice IP, ServiceNow. I mean, that's just a brief description of what we do. We do staff augmentation as well. But we've been in business for 25 years in the private sector. And, about 3 months ago, I've been put in charge of an effort to break us into the public sector, like government contracting, state and local, and federal opportunities as well. My question would be, how can a company with extensive private sector experience effectively position itself in the government market? And what are the common challenges IT service providers face when they're first entering the government market?
Great questions. And I will answer for my part, and then maybe Nicole and Stephanie would add to that. But I would say that one of the challenges that companies have, and this is not about your type of company, but any type of company, is you need a mechanism for responding to the RFP, right? So there are limited resources. There's only so many hours in a day. You really need a way to respond to the RFP, whether that's going to be an in-house employee, a combination of people, and or a contracted resource. So do you have a way to respond to the RFPs?
Yeah, we've recently put a team together to, I'm part of the team that finds the RFPs, and then I send it up to the technical SMEs along with our contracting specialists, and they make the determination if we can actually do it. And then the contracting specialist, he has experience, well, in the private sector, responding and creating contracts. So he's the one who actually responds to the agency and tracks all that stuff, and works together with the technical leads to create a proposal.
So I would say you have a leg up on a lot of companies that you might be competing with in the private sector markets, because if you have the ability to respond to an RFP at that point, I should tell you that in the same report that we just put into the chat, one question was, and I'm paraphrasing, I don't remember how we worded it, was like, what are some of the things that you're having trouble finding vendors for? And we got a lot of people who are saying they have trouble finding people to meet technology requirements. So you just happen to be in a field where it's all in front of you. Like the opportunities are endless. And if you think the private sector needs help with IT and development, the government needs way more help than the private sector does because they can't figure any of it out.
I've been
You know, and
finding
we could
that
give
out.
you examples of websites that had the same problem date on a day in 2016, and that problem is still there on the website in 2025. So
Yeah.
you're in a good industry. I would just encourage you to selectively pick RFPs that look like what you do. Don't be afraid to submit an offer, but don't go beyond your ability to submit a good package. So all things being equal, if you could submit 2 or 3 really good proposals next month, submit 3 good ones, great ones. Don't submit 7 poor ones.
Yep. Yeah. So I've been seeing a lot of compliance requirements that, you know, you don't usually see in the private sector, like FedRAMP. We just recently joined E-Rate. There's some other ones out there. You have to be like a certified reseller for certain companies if you want to provide service or support. There's just a lot of hurdles that we've never really seen before, and we're slowly working on getting those compliances. But bouncing off of what Dave said about like that, he was saying that for federal RFPs, or no, he was saying for state and local RFPs, generally they have an idea of who they're working with already. I actually heard the other way around. If it's a federal RFP without an RFI, that generally means that the agency already knows who they're working with, and they're putting that RFP out as like a formality. And then on the state level, if they have an RFP without an RFI, that doesn't really matter too much. I could be wrong. I'm 3 months into this, so I don't really know too much.
Fair comments. I will tell you that there are certainly federal and state and local opportunities where it's wired for a certain company. But I would encourage you to download the report we put into the chat because it's just not as frequently as you may think. And I have direct experience helping people in a previous career write RFP responses where they flat out told me, we don't know anyone at this government agency, and we would see people win all the time just because they could actually do it. They could provide the goods, and they had references that would speak to the fact that they could do it. So if you could submit a good proposal, if you can actually provide the service, and if you have third parties who will tell the government, yeah, they can do it, there's no reason you should not submit an offer.
Yeah, that's the mindset that I'm taking. So for references, I can use the private sector references as like past performance, even though it's not within like a government agency or something like that, and they'll still take a look at it and be, you know, like that would still help my case.
Absolutely. And all things being equal, you might, if you have a choice between a private sector reference and what you think is a smaller government reference, use the government reference if you can only use one. But if you don't have a government reference, then use whichever one feels the most similar, or references that you feel the most similar to what they're looking for.
Okay. And I actually have one more question. So say we provided services for a school like 10 years ago. Does that count as past performance if I start bidding on contracts now, if the work is similar?
Or could someone speak to the recency of past performance?
Yeah. So as I think Nicole earlier had said, that they're looking for experience that is relevant and recent. And what exactly is considered recent can vary depending on what the solicitation is. I think most often it's somewhere in that 3 to 5 year range is what I've noticed myself with, but you know, it certainly varies. And if you have something recent, make sure you get within that time, because we've seen proposals be turned away because they didn't meet that requirement.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, 10 years is a long time, especially in the technology field. So, I mean, like the technology and infrastructure that we were working on in the past has obviously changed now. So it's, I guess like 10 years is a little too much for that, but I just wanted to ask just in case I wanted to, you know, if that would help my proposal or not. So,
Yeah, try to avoid it. Newer relevant references are always prized more, and government references are prized more. And you may end up having conversations with your team where you might say, well, we have a government reference from 3 years ago, and we have a private sector reference that we could use today. Then you have a decision to make, unless they're not saying how many references to provide, in which case provide both.
okay, thank you.
Yeah, and so John, what are you looking forward to this year?
So this year, mainly just winning that first contract for this company because, like I said, 3 months ago, we started the effort to break into the government contracts. And I actually approached the owner myself and told him, hey, like you've been focusing on the private sector. You have all this past experience capabilities. You should, focus on government contracts. He's like, that's not a bad idea. And he just put me in charge of the effort. So securing that first government contract would make my year.
Well, I think it's likely to happen, John, because if you have the ability to respond to RFPs, the needs are endless in the technology space.
Yep.
And it's just a matter of finding the right ones to bid on and then determining like how many bids would you need to submit in a year to give you the return that your company would need to make it successful.
Yep. Yeah. In the beginning, it's a little hard. I feel like we're going to be sending out a lot of RFPs, RFIs, no responses, and just, burning money. But when that first contract finally catches, then we'll start getting more and more business and finally make our money back, hopefully. So
I suspect it will happen. So John, please stay with us. We're going to bring Ricardo on. You can go on mute, go off camera, and then jump back in when you feel like you need to in the discussion. How does that sound?
sounds good. Thank you.
Ricardo, welcome to MyGovWatch Live. What do you do and where are you joining us from?
Thank you. Thank you. Joining you from Connecticut. My name is Ricardo. Started a small general contracting business close to 2 years ago. Really some interesting conversations here. A lot of some questions I had, even when I touched base with Nick, are answered. But I'm looking to get my feet wet in this scenario. And with the big boys in the construction industry and being, a small GC, I like the idea of getting to be a sub. So I'm asking, how could I get to know about once a proposal's out, someone's win that bid to be a sub for them? Or is there a way to network with those to be a sub? How would you guys recommend going about that?
Stephanie, I don't know if you'd like to maybe start from your experience, or would you like to add to what I might say, or Nicole?
I would say add to.
Okay. So Ricardo, you are you do construction. What kind of construction?
So I do small commercial, residential.
Okay. You are sort of in the perfect industry to be looking at our website, mygovwatch.com. And it's true for other industries, but particularly so with construction. So people are using our site all the time, and they will see construction projects, right, where they're accepting bids on February 15th. And no one's going to pick up a hammer until September or October. And so if you don't want to be the prime, you can use our site to identify which construction projects have been budgeted for that will be contracted for 6 and 12 months later, where they're going to be looking for subs either during their bid or after they win the contract.
Okay.
You can also see architectural and engineering projects. So now you can see things that haven't happened and are going to probably take 2 years to happen. So there are a lot of people who use our site just to identify things that are in the pipeline for construction and use our site as a jumping off point to find out like who are the interested parties so they can cold call them.
Oh, I like that. I like that. Okay.
Ladies, what would you say about federal construction opportunities? And you said this is your business, Ricardo?
Correct.
So programs that Ricardo might be looking at, or just any observations?
And it's the goal is primarily for subcontracting at this time, right?
Yes, I'm saying that to kind of get the feet wet, understand.
Yeah.
We're
Did we
losing
lose
you, Ricardo.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, I was saying yes, that would be the goal at the moment, to get my feet wet into the federal programs. Yes.
Perfect. So yes, so I think one of the most important things you can do when you're using subcontracting as a way to get your feet wet is making sure that you have a very solid subcontract agreement, or if you're getting those from the prime contractor, that you have a solid legal mind to review those. You have a target on your back as a newer federal government contracting firm that is starting with subcontracting. Nothing that's, dramatic or anything, but to where some of these larger companies see you and think, well, they're not going to know what all the federal government contract rules are. They're not going to know exactly what they need to look out for in these subcontracts. And you see a lot of steamrolling where you have terms in there that are really not fair. And you often sometimes have terms in there that aren't even legally compliant. They're not properly flowing down everything that needs to be flowed down to their subcontractors and things like that. So making sure that you don't just immediately start out on a bad subcontract, either that harms your company kind of individually, but also that could right off the bat have you out of compliance with some federal regulation that you're supposed to be following as a subcontractor based on the prime's mistake. So I think that's the biggest thing, is making sure that if that is where you're starting, your subcontracts are either being very thoroughly reviewed, or they're coming from you and you know what terms you're willing to agree to negotiate and you're not going to budge on. I think that can be a very good first line of defense to make sure when it's time to take that first step as a prime, you have good relevant experience that did not harm your company that you can use from your subcontracting days.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that heads up.
You definitely, in a situation like that, want to have help before it becomes a problem. We often see situations where they have already become a problem, whether it's like meeting the limitations on subcontracting. I think that's a big one that we see. And it, for newer contractors especially, you really want to make sure that you've got that solid agreement before things become a problem, and that someone who is a lot more familiar with the industry has had their eyes on it to make sure that you are aware of what the actual requirements are.
Yeah, actually, lately I've been trying to engage with a construction law rep to just start doing that, because a lot of times a lot of these clients that I get try to play tricks. So yeah, I can imagine it being even more vital in that role. So I truly appreciate that heads up.
Yeah, and it's of course it's going to be good to have a construction attorney under your belt, but really any federal government contract attorney would be able to take a look at your subcontract and at least give you information on what's fair and not fair. We have a ton of construction clients, and give you kind of the what is properly being flowed down. Sometimes primes will flow down things they don't need to flow down in order to put additional limitations or requirements on you. So really, I think at this stage, construction attorneys can be very important. I think more so when it comes to the actual litigation of subcontracts and the litigation of issues and disputes. But a good federal government contract attorney, whether it be our firm or one of the many firms out there that do what we do, I think is really probably your best bet for your initial subcontract reviews to make sure that you're in line for where you need to be.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Some follow-up questions, Ricardo, or do you just want to stay on with us?
I'll come off camera, but I'll be around for sure.
Okay, well, Ricardo, what is there anything that you're looking forward to this year?
So definitely. So I got one son. He's turning 13. I sometimes think he's turning 30, but he's all into anime. So my wife and I are looking forward to, for this summer, we're bringing him to Japan, actually, because he's
Nice.
Yeah, so that's the plan. He's just going to be out of his mind when he finds out we're going to the airport and not knowing where he's going. He's going to be, I don't even know, but I'm looking forward to that. I can't wait to see the smile on his face.
Ricardo, that makes you my brother from another mother. That's fantastic.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, please stay with us and jump back in if you hear something that makes you want to ask a follow-up question.
Definitely. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. And we're going to bring on Scott. Scott, we just need you off mute. So you're still on mute. There we go. So Scott, welcome to MyGovWatch Live. What do you do and where are you joining us from?
I am the founder of Potomac Health Associates.
And Scott, let me just stop you there. If you could just move closer to your microphone or turn your microphone up. We're just I'm having a little trouble hearing you.
Okay, how is this? Any better?
Yes.
Okay. I'm the founder of Potomac Health Associates. And we are a consulting firm that specializes in working with health organizations that are interested in federal contracting or are for the first time or are interested in growing their portfolio of business. We are located in the Metro DC area and have been in business for longer than I'd care to acknowledge. Anyhow, thank you again for sponsoring this. And I've been on before, Nick, you may recall, and I want to offer my thanks to both Nicole and Stephanie for the information they've provided so far. My general question today relates to the non-displacement rule and some of the executive orders that have taken place around that. My understanding is that the rule or order has bounced back and forth between Democratic and Republican administrations, and that when Trump was first elected, that he rescinded that order, that it was subsequently put back in place. I don't know if they retained the same language when Biden took office, and I believe it is still in effect right now. It seems to me that that is one of the potentially significant regulations that could revert back to the way Trump had rescinded it. And I am interested in knowing what you guys think. My own impression is that it is at risk for just the general political philosophy that has been espoused so far. But I would be interested in your perspective as well.
I can offer bubkiss here, ladies.
I am not very familiar with that to speak intelligently on it. Nicole, do you know much about this area?
So I don't know. I literally just tried to pull up a recent kind of all of those initial executive orders that already were rescinded to see where we stand specifically. But I mean, you nailed it. So it's been a very back and forth. We have the FAR has certain provisions in it about non-displacement of qualified workers, basically saying where a contractor takes over another contractor's contract, that if at all possible to keep the qualified workers that are experienced and that are in place on that contract there, they should be doing so. And there was actually a requirement. Well, it has very much gone back and forth between the different administrations, all the way back to Obama, from having, absolutely no requirements to keep qualified workers to having full requirements to keep every qualified worker, to back and forth. And it has really been kind of another one of those sagas. So I know that we have the executive order from 2021, I think would be the last time that it was reinstated, of the non-displacement of qualified workers under service contracts. And it basically had a right of first refusal. And I believe that had been rescinded previously by Trump. Yeah, so what I'm happy to do, because I don't want you to sit on here while I do the actual research, so many changes have come out in the last couple of days. Let us get you a better answer on that one, and we can easily send it to you via email. Just drop your email into the chat, because I want to make sure before I start, I can tell you what it's about. I can tell you it's gone back and forth a lot. I can't tell you 100% certainly where we stand at this point in time, whether Trump has addressed that one yet or not.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
And Scott,
Yeah.
you can either put it in the chat, or if you want, I will start an email just with 3 or 4 of us. Do you have a preference?
Well, now I can use the chat. I couldn't use it before, so I will enter it.
Okay, go ahead and do that. That's fine. That's fine. And so folks, we're just at about an hour and 10 minutes. We don't have a hard start or stop with MyGovWatch Live. We just sort of let it, finish organically when people feel like their questions have been answered. So I'm just going to stop here and see if anyone else, and I know there was at least one anonymous question where I couldn't tell who you were, so we just need you to raise your hand if you do have a question. We're just going to sort of pause and just see if others have some additional questions before we start to wind things down. And while we're waiting for someone to maybe formulate a question, I would like to share my screen, and maybe Nicole or Stephanie can talk about what would you like people to do as a result of this session, because I have both the firm website in a browser, and I'm going to share that. Let me just do it. And I also have small GovCon. So let me go to that, and maybe you can just talk about, like, what would you like people to do if they're interested in hearing more about the firm or government contracts?
Yeah. Let me see.
What's
First. Okay.
their best way of interacting with you and the firm?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a wide variety of options. I would say no matter what, I think that the blog is a fantastic resource for you. It's the small GovCon blog that Nick has up there. And it is free to be a part of it, free to sign up for the newsletter and get notifications on those new blogs. We're going to be posting an awful lot of blogs about the big upcoming changes. A lot of the questions today have been surrounding what do we expect? What changes are we expecting? And I think that is a really, really good way to stay up to date on those. The newsletter, again, is something you can sign up for that will keep you up to date on those blogs. If you're looking for a more in-depth dive into any of the, kind of certification programs or topics we covered today, like joint ventures or calculating your size, you can find on that blog that we have certain handbooks. They're like $9 to buy on Amazon. Anyone that becomes a client gets handbook for free, but you go, get one of those if you want a little bit of a deeper read, and then you can reach out. There's an info box for the blog. You can reach out about any blog questions that you have, but you also are always free to contact us directly at Koprince. If you get on our website, it's Koprince McCall Pottroff. And we're an LLC. And if you get on there and specifically find, contact us, you can say this question is for Nicole or Stephanie. You're also more than welcome to email us directly. That would be the letter of our first name, our last name at Koprince.com. So in Pottroff at Koprince.com, Ellis at Koprince.com. And we will get back to you with any answers as time allows. Keep in mind, we can't give legal advice unless and until you become a client, but we can give a lot of good general advice that can get you to where you're going. And then if you are interested, let's say you've got subcontracts that you want reviewed or anything like that, and you're interested in talking, we do hand out a free 30-minute phone call to anyone interested in becoming a client. We're talking about ways that we can assist. So definitely reach out if you're looking for any of that. For a quick little pause, because I do think I found, Scott, I think I found your answer. It does look like as part of the initial big ol' resending of a bunch of executive orders that the non-displacement of qualified workers, the requirement for that was from 2021 was officially rescinded. So it does seem like now we were going to be dealing with, essentially, there's no reason, as far as I know, that you can't try to keep qualified workers from a prior contract, but you do start running into more issues when you're trying to do so, where you don't have a regulation supporting you doing so. You do kind of start running into questions about what's called bait and switch and things like that, where if your proposal is saying we're going to try to keep those qualified workers, but that's what everybody's proposal is saying, it makes it a little hard for the government to evaluate what employees you actually have working, what key personnel you actually have working on certain things. So it will be interesting to see how that plays out, but I do think that answers, at least generally, answers your question as to where we stand on that one.
Yes, I appreciate the answer. Thank
Yep,
you.
no problem, no problem. Yeah, Nick, but back to you. That was contact us at the blog or directly at the firm, kind of depending on what kind of answers you're looking for. We are always happy to talk, happy to answer emails as time allows, and get back to you with answers as best we can.
Fair enough. So ladies, I just want to say we have no other questions, and it feels like the right stopping point. So I just want to thank you both for joining us today, and Nicole especially for continuing to be involved in our promotional efforts together. I will just say for our part, that will do it for today's edition of MyGovWatch Live. Remember, if you're not already a subscriber, start your free 14-day trial at mygovwatch.com today. If you want to win more government contracts for less, you'll be glad you did. Folks, thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks, guys. Thanks for coming. Bye.
Bye-bye.